Thank you very much for coming tonight to this very special evening that we have with a very special guest, Caroline de Gruyter. Welcome to Vienna.
Thank you.
It's such a pleasure that this fall we can all sit back here in the room and we don't have to be online and do our things from all these capitals where we are. And especially for you, because you could, of course, work from Oslo, from Vienna, from Brussels, wherever you lived. But you're back now in the European, the center of European power in Brussels for not the first time. You have been a correspondent for Handelsblad, NRC Handelsblad, one of the most important Dutch daily newspapers. For a long time, a columnist and also an EU correspondent, so you're one of the leading experts on European politics already for years. You are a member of the ECFR, of the European Council for Foreign Relations. You write books every few years, one comes out. And with your latest book, you surprised us a little bit here, us Austrians. And I was thinking, when you told me about it, there are always two reasons why it's good to look at things from outside to the inside. Because as Austrians, we always thought, okay, the Habsburgs is beyond us, and we don't really need to discuss it anymore. But if you come from the outside, like Caroline did, and moved straight to the center of the 13th district, basically in the vicinity of Schönbrunn, and then you suddenly realize what undercurrents of this whole empire, Habsburg phantoms are still in the city and in the politics. So that was one thing, and we'll discuss it in a second, because I think it's quite interesting, your findings, your little surprises that you came up with on the way through doing your research. But the second idea, which is the basic idea of these books, you didn't want to discuss the little monarchistic leftovers in Austria. You wanted to speak about the similarities or the parallels or also the differences between the Habsburg Empire and the European Union, and what Europe can today learn from the experience of this empire that ended 100 years ago. And when you started researching this in 2016, it was a completely different period. It was a little bit like before and after the First World War. So we'll come to the bigger implications of the war that we are now experiencing and what it will mean for the European Union. So let's go a little bit, make a roundup throughout this thing. This book, we have to say also, which was originally published in Dutch, and I think it's in the 3rd edition or something like this?
19th.
19th edition with 35,000 copies. So that is a big, huge success. Yes. for
nobody saw that
non-fiction.
Coming.
Yeah,
No.
That's really wonderful. And it was also published here, of course, this June. And Caroline just showed me the upcoming translations now in French, and it will also come up in Hungarian, my friends of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Quite an interesting moment also to have this book in particularly in Hungarian, not only because of the Habsburg past and the empire past, but also because of your particular critical opinions on the current Hungarian government. So we'll want to get an update if you get invited to book talks there too.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and this book has been translated into German by, do we have his name? Because we always like to say the names of the translators, don't we? Leopold de Kloet. Sorry, this is always a problem with the Dutch names. And so the book is a success. It is a success because the author is very well known throughout Europe and has also an ability to grasp all this very complicated historical layers. And you show us this also when you go in chapter by chapter from the different capitals of the European Union on the on the traces and tracks of the Habsburgs 100 years ago and today. But what I liked is when you had the first encounters in your neighborhood in the 13th district, and something that I never thought about, but how do these people who we took their aristocratic fonds away from, and also some of their properties, how do they live today? And then you found out, which is one of my favorite stories, that some of the families till today don't invite each other to their Christmas concerts because they consider that they were closer to the emperor 100 years ago. How did that come about? I mean, what did you as a Republican person feel when you got closer to this aristocratic underlaying Vienna?
What you feel is how everybody gets determined by history, like it or not. Even if you think you're not, you are. And in this case, somebody was not invited because they had been closer to the Kaiser and they were bragging about it. You know, but the closeness was not the problem, but the bragging was. And so I couldn't get enough of all these things. We lived on a little square called the Katharina Schradplatz. And, I mean, just very small. So one day, also having dinner with neighbors, I was asking, who was this Katharina Schrat anyway? And then total silence. Nobody said anything. And then finally one said, you don't know who Katharina Schrat was? It's like verifying, like, is she really so ignorant? But she was the mistress of the emperor. She lived right there, opposite your house. So, you know, they were pointing out in which house they lived and why they put her up there, because they could then smuggle her through a little side door in the Schönbrunn Park into the palace without everybody seeing it. Yeah. And that's also when I found out that the house opposite our house, so our house was divided into flats already, which was a challenge because you don't have this in Brussels or in Norway or wherever. It was used as a reception area before, in the good old days, by the family who owned the entire house. So one room opens into another room. But if you want to give your children a bedroom, when everybody has to go through everybody's room before arriving in his own room. So, I mean, it was like applied mathematics. It was really complicated. But then we found out that the house opposite us had also been a family house built by the Esterházys, and they were still there. I'm amazed by these things. Yeah. I'm amazed by these things. And then you can say, like, we're over it and it doesn't play any role. I don't think so.
Why?
Because it does.
I mean, for us, the way we were educated, and I realize also, I mean, some people, of course, are educated in a more conservative part of the Austrian society than I was. But for us, it was almost, you know, we were, of course, proud also, that we abolished the monarchy, became a republic, even if that was not an easy road for Austria to take, and it wasn't very successful at the beginning. But in principle, it was we were proud that we don't have a monarchy, that we don't have aristocrats, that there is not this class system, which I live in London, and of course you are constantly, you know, pestered by what the monarchs do, the royal family here, there, and anywhere, and it's totally irrelevant, in fact, what they do. And then in your book you describe it, that, you know, like the Esterházys here, the Esterházys there, but also what we were not even raised, or in my generation, we didn't discuss what they do, because it wasn't so relevant, but also the fact that Otto von Habsburg actually till 1965 still appointed nobility. You know, he still sort of put someone into the against money or what? Yeah. Yes. So it's just incredible. All these things, and you describe it in the book. So did you have, of course, a longer. a longer chapter also on Otto von Habsburg, who has at least a connection to European politics. It's not that he was only busy with his own, personal fate, but he had a feeling for Europe.
He was. I've seen him in the European Parliament, but I'm really sorry that he died before I started working on this book and that I had to make do with his sons. Because he was really. I wrote this book not because of all the folklore in Hietzing, and I believe also in the entire Austria, because it's still there. But I wrote the book because I found out how more or less the Habsburg Empire functioned, at least the last 150 years, and it reminded me a lot of what I had seen in Brussels for 10 years. And then I thought, this is interesting, that, people were in the empire, they were all complaining that everything was too slow, too bureaucratic, everybody was too divided. The Czechs were against the Croats, and then the Hungarians came along, and it was constant. Maybe not fighting, but everybody was trying to fight for their own rights and their own goodies and their own privileges and so on. So I wrote the book because we are doing exactly the same in the European Union right now. And the EU is not a state like Habsburg was, and we don't have a Kaiser. And I hope we never get one, because then it's probably not a very good sign. So this is why I started using all the folklore, because I wanted to write a book about Europe. And I wanted people to, via the detour of the Habsburgers, to understand what is actually happening in Brussels.
Yeah, one of the things...
if I may finish, because that was your question, Otto. And Otto saw that link, I think, before anybody else did. And he saw the European Union, in a way, as a continuation of the Habsburg Empire in a different way. And he said so many times, and he wrote it, and I thought this was interesting. And, I never did an academic study. I never studied all the parallels and all the differences. I was not interested in that. But there were lots of things going on in the Habsburg Empire that reminded me of things I had seen in the European Union. And Otto had the same. I found this very interesting. So I'm really sorry I could only read all his books and look at his videos he made and that you see on YouTube. There's a lot of stuff there.
Well, he also, at least he sort of developed over his long life from thinking that he should be emperor to investing his energies maybe on a conservative side of the European politics, but he tried to sort of go from thinking on the level of nation, but on the level of Europe. So that's probably one positive thing we can say about him, can we? If you look at what you say, that it's sort of trying to bring the nations together. So at the time as today in the European Union, the bigger nations more or less decide the fate of the European Union. So if Germany and France get together and they come up with a plan, then it has more chance to be implemented than as if Austria and Slovenia have a plan together, which also doesn't happen often because there's not a lot of initiative coming from the Austrians on a productive level in the European Union. But so there is this thing, of course, that the bigger nations dominate the politics, as the Austro-Hungarian Empire sort of pushed along an agenda that often took along the smaller nations with them. But what you also describe, of course, is that today, and that's a big difference, everyone in the European Union, every nation has a seat at the table.
Yeah. the big ones, I think, without the European Union, would be much more powerful than they are now. What the European Union does with the big states is they keep them in check. And it was a stroke of genius, of course, to set up this single market with rules that have to apply for everybody. So they not only apply for Slovenia and Luxembourg or the small ones, but also for the big ones. So you make sure that the big ones are kept a little bit in check. And you give the small ones a little bit more space to breathe. And also, you keep them from being overrun by the big ones. Because when war breaks out, when you don't have that kind of a framework, and war has broken out several times between France and Germany, then, you know, the first one to be overrun is Luxembourg, and the second usually is Belgium, and then it continues from there. Yeah, so they are still big, and they're still dominant, but they would have been much more big and dominant otherwise. And what you see now, for instance, today with Hungary, in a position where they try to block a big financial package, a loan to Ukraine. They try to block a tax from multinational companies that everybody agrees on already, and they just want to block it to get their money. And there you see how a small state, Austria has played a lot of tricks too in the recent past. It wanted more vaccines because it had chosen the wrong ones. It had chosen itself. And then Chancellor Kurz, he came to Brussels and made an incredible fuss about nothing. And they just let him do it, you know. And everybody was totally fed up with Kurz, just like everybody's now totally fed up. I mean, it's almost unanimous. Totally fed up with Orban, but still he can play his game, and he will get something in the end.
But it's really interesting because you have this whole chapter on Hungary in your book. I really recommend it. It's a rather hilarious scene with a Hungarian ambassador, and you conclude at the end of it that the interesting thing about Hungary, which explains a little bit why they have been a problem for the Austrians, for the Habsburgs, during the time when the Habsburgs would have liked to rule over all the nations, and the Hungarians were resisting this. But from then till today, they are sort of troublemakers. And one of the reasons you say is that they feel that they are at the same time victim as also savior of Europe. Can you elaborate a little bit on this?
Well, yeah, this was at the end of I was living after, so I lived in Vienna between 2013 and 2017, and that's where I got the idea of the book. Then I moved to Oslo, and I had some distance and the pandemic and everything. So I started really writing. And then at some point, the Hungarian ambassador in Oslo, she heard that I was doing this. And at some point, I ran into her at the reception, and then she planted her fists like this and said, "Ha, are you writing on the Habsburg Empire? You come and interview me." Okay. So I went to interview her, and this was 2.5 hours of, you know, screaming, yelling, crying, laughing, drinking, and eating a 4-course meal with heavy Tokaj wines and everything. And there, she took me through the entire history of Hungary first in the Habsburg Empire, and now in a new kind of empire, as she called it. Saying, like, we are always different than anybody. In the Habsburg Empire, we felt always alone. And, you know, so that's why we were always the loudest and making our points harder and harsher than anybody else. Because we always had the feeling that everybody was running over us. And we have the same thing in the EU. When there's a European Council and all the heads of state and government, they come to Brussels. You know, all the French speakers, they're in one corner, and the German speakers, they go and have coffees together. There's a rapport, you know. You have little groups here and there, and they vary a bit from time to time as well. She says, we are always alone. And it's true. So in that sense, you feel you're alone. You have to. There's nobody else who will get you the goodies you want and you think you need. So you go and get them. So she also made a comparison with a small tackle, a small dog. And she says, this small dog, you know, there's too much body for its little feet.
Oh, the
and that's how we are.
The poor tackle.
Yeah, tackle. Okay, yeah. And that's exactly how we are, you know. And when you point at us with your finger, we bite it off. That's how we are, you know. And she was proud of it even.
I mean, yes. It's really a little bit annoying to think that that even, you know, that in a situation where they dismantle their democracy in Hungary now, that we have to discuss, you know, how this is again the fault of Brussels, basically, because it's so easy to always point the finger at Brussels. So how do you think this will end, this current standoff? Will it end next week at the European Summit? How to match the help, the financial help for the Ukraine with financial help for Budapest?
Yes. Well, I think they will try to solve it next week because it's a small country. Everybody goes around Hungary right now because they're isolated. They don't have a lot of support usually, so it's easy. But now they make a big stink, so they want to solve it because of that. And Orban knows that. So they will give him something. The Commission, the European Commission, made a proposal on how Hungary is doing with the reforms it was supposed to have done, political reforms. It was supposed to have done to get 13.5 billion euros, which is a lot of money.
That comes from the recovery fund.
No, that's regular money. That's structural
fund.
funds. Yeah. So, and the Commission is not satisfied, so they want to withhold 65%, which is a lot. 70% of all the public spending in Hungary is European money. So Orban will really feel this. So he's mad. He wants to get this money. What is happening now is that he quickly did some reforms after the deadline, which are not in the report. So he says, you're too harsh on me, and look what I've done, and so on. I mean, I'm simplifying now, but... And some countries, they just want to get rid of the problem. And big countries as well. So what I think will happen is that the 65%, because the member states, they don't want to withhold so much, will go down maybe to 50 or to 40, I don't know. They're member states, this whole rule of law issue was not put there by the member states. It was put there by the European Parliament, and it was put there by the European Commission. Member states feel very uneasy about this because they know that today we tackle Hungary, but maybe tomorrow then they can touch me for some other reason. I'm the best Democrat in Europe, of course, but maybe they will find fault somewhere and they will tackle me. And this they don't like. Yeah. So they like to settle things among themselves, but at the same time they know that it's also a big public issue. So they have to do something. So I think they will settle for a compromise, as they always do.
Well, that's a similarity definitely with Habsburg Empire, as you point out, that this policy of muddling through, of somehow finding a compromise rather than breaking up the union.
The principle in the EU, which I think was never formulated like this in the Habsburg Empire, but was more or less the same. We can't have real winners or losers. Even the losers, they need to get something. So they need to go home after a summit in Brussels or something and say, look what we've got. And then not talk about everything they had to give away or had to stop doing or something. But, you know, everybody needs to get some goodies. And it's not just important for ministers or heads of state and government, so they can stay on and they're not humiliated in front of their own people, but it is also a recipe to continue. You know, one of the things that struck me in reading so much about the Habsburgers is that it functioned exactly the same way. Everybody was always complaining. The Croats were complaining, the Hungarians were complaining the most, just like now. Nobody could get everything he wanted. So, but they got enough out of it to continue. And this is basically what the EU is also doing. And they're very aware of the fact that if a country doesn't get enough out of it anymore, it will actually change loyalties with one of the bigger rivals surrounding it, which is another parallel, especially now, and leave. Why did the UK leave? I mean, there are many reasons, of course, but one of the reasons was that during the financial crisis, the Euro crisis, all these migration worries, summit after summit in Brussels at the end after the financial crisis. David Cameron was sitting there, and he was just, I mean, it was not his issue. Because the UK didn't have the currency, they didn't have the euro, they were not in Schengen. So all these very emotional and very political, all this drama was not his drama, it was the EU's drama. And you know, if you talk to people who sat in that room and ask them how the UK behaved, because we all believed that the UK was obstructing everything all the time, which was true for a long time. But in the end, during these crises, they were not even talking anymore.
But it's of course, now that Brexit is not so easy to reverse anymore, but the principal question of, is the policy of muddling through the only way how the European Union can exist? Or is it necessary to put in some rules and some development and more democracy in order to make it clear to people what they are signing up to? Because that's the whole point, that, as you say, there were different ways of being a European Union member, being in Schengen or not, being in the currency or not. So was that a mistake, or is this the only way how it would always work, that you had different circles of closeness?
I think maybe muddling through is not everything, but compromise is. I think and that's what the Habsburgers did too all the time. They compromised. Because if you know, I was very much, now everybody's talking about the veto.
Yeah. Shall we abolish it or not?
Yeah. On foreign policy issues, Hungary will veto the next package of sanctions against Russia too. I mean, how far can you allow a member state to just hijack everything, to take everybody hostage? So for a long time, I was really for scrapping the veto. And then we had the migration issue. I think 2016, 17, where the Visegrad countries, they didn't want to agree with this distribution system of
the
refugees. And then somebody said, but you know, we can decide on this without unanimity. This is only a qualified majority voting. And there was a majority for the distribution system. So they did it like that, and they overruled the Visegrad countries. Everybody happy. I was happy to act. You know, finally there's a clear decision and so on. And then after that, it became even a bigger issue.
And it didn't work.
And the whole migration issue, which would have been stuck without this already, became even more stuck. And other dossiers got stuck too, because they felt humiliated, they felt treated like, you know, babies, like I don't know what, but it really spoiled a lot. And it was probably not worth it. I think there could have been, so scrapping a veto sounds easier, I think, and more beautiful than it is. Well, because then you really signal to nations, to countries, like it doesn't matter what you say. And this, and even, you know, so in a way we are condemned in this system. So what I think is, yes, we need this system, we need these compromises. But at the same time, we should also remain ambitious. And I don't mean dreaming of all these things that we will never get. But, you know, if you look at all these things that countries have promised to do, and they never did. You know, I think the biggest problem in Europe is not a lack of democracy. I think the biggest problem in Europe is a lack of political will.
No, of course. I mean, you also make an interesting recommendation to at the end of your book to put Vice Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, Vice Chancellor for European affairs directly under the Prime Minister in every nation state without a ministerial portfolio, so that the European agenda is always very much on the top of one person in each government, in order to give it also the visibility and the concentration and focus on it whenever it's needed. I think that would be a very interesting thing, as most prime ministers, in any case, when they form governments, always look for more posts to give to some of their best friends. That could be an option to actually do that. But I still wonder if this, because I think your point is really valid, that if you seek compromise, and you have to work hard because you have to convince every single person on the table, then you will sort of invest more energy into doing it. On the other hand, of course, when the European Union or the community was founded, there were 6 members, and then there were 15 members, and sort of, you know, now we have 27, and the question is really if every time you need to make a decision, you can really work with this veto system
look
forever.
At how we work now. Since Russia invaded Ukraine, look how fast everything goes. It's not easy. It will never be easy. That's really a dream. That will never happen. It will never be easy. But the Ukrainians who fled to the EU, they got the status in 5 days. 5 days it was arranged. I mean, when we want something, and this is back to the point, if there's a political will, it will happen.
Yeah.
A lot of sanctions packages have passed. Lots of decisions have been taken. The same during the pandemic. You know, first of all, everybody wanted their own vaccines, of course. You know, nobody wants the Commission to arrange that. But very quickly, they found out, like, okay, so the big countries, they have deeper pockets, they will have bigger orders, so they will get the vaccines first and cheaper. The small ones and the poor ones, they will get them, you know, maybe 10, 12 months later for a much bigger price. So what you get then is that some pockets in Europe are vaccinated, and you know how sensitive that is, and their neighbors are not. All the borders will be, it will be a total, it will perhaps even be the end of the internal market. So yeah, probably better to do it together. So, and then the Commission did it, and I haven't heard anybody about it anymore. It's run like a clockwork.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It is probably one of the big successes of European Union history, that the COVID pandemic was managed together. But I mean, everyone,
very fast again.
And very fast also.
Yeah.
But you will all remember how people were upset when the British population was vaccinated, or started to be vaccinated first, because of the AstraZeneca vaccine being developed with Oxford University together, and the government had spent lots of money just to be the first and be this. And it was amazing because it was clear that Europe would catch up because it was a well-organized thing. But it just took 3 months longer because it's like more people.
Not 3 months. It took a few weeks longer. But then I think the ministers and the prime ministers and the chancellors and whatever they're called, everybody was complaining. Everybody was looking at the Americans and the British. They should have said, look, you know, it's normal that we're a little bit late because we took the time to strike out on our own and just check if we could do it by ourselves. So it's normal that, but they don't say this, of course. So they let citizens rail against Brussels. I mean, sometimes they rail against Brussels for the right reasons, but now it was for the wrong reason. Brussels proposed, let us organize this, because then everybody will have the vaccines at the same time and fast, because when you do it collectively, you know, it's a big order, you can get them really fast, and for the same price. But, you know, the member states didn't want it. They first wanted to check out if they could do it alone. So it takes time. But so it's logical.
Yeah. If you look at it, so we every time we have a crisis in the European Union, people think, okay, that might be the end. So you also say this in your book that it always feels like an existential crisis. It's not that people say like, okay, we have a government crisis, we have a financial crisis, we have a euro crisis, we have a refugee crisis, we have now, then we had the COVID crisis, and now we have the war crisis. And you know, usually in nations, people would say, okay, we have to overcome this. Yeah, sometimes you fall into big distress, but you don't cancel the whole project. In the European Union, we still have this insecurity among people that people outside, in any case, the Americans and the Brits are always already betting on the European Union collapsing, but also within there's a lot of insecurity. And I wonder if this is if this will ever change, that people will understand actually the European Union is here to stay, or is this a question of its specific character, that it's always questioned by everyone because it is a union by invitation, that you can, like as Gideon Rahman says, that you can in principle leave.
Yes, but I think if that would not have been the case, they would have said the same thing. I'm invited sometimes to TV programs, and then they say, you know, we've invited somebody who's against the EU, and we thought, you're for the EU, are you not? And then I mean, I hate this kind of setting. But it's like, how can you be against it? It is there, you know? It's like the Netherlands. Are you for the Netherlands or are you against the Netherlands? And they said, yeah, but it's a different thing. No, it is not. It is not.
But there is a difference, because you can leave. I mean, you know, if you get the wrong government in the Netherlands and it decides to leave, it's very unlikely, of course, as we can see with Brexit. Not a big success. Not a lot of nations who are now arguing for actually leaving the European Union. The last ones are the Hungarians who would like to
I mean,
leave.
all the populists in Europe who had exit plans, they have swallowed them. They are now... I mean, it's perhaps a more dangerous game. They want to go to Brussels and change Europe from the inside. It's very interesting what's happening. Marine Le Pen, who wanted to leave the Eurozone, she doesn't anymore. The Dutch Euroskeptics, they don't want to leave anymore. Giorgia Meloni, she loves the euro, and she was always against it. And she calls it Italy's best insurance or something the other day. Yeah. So what they want to do, and Orban certainly doesn't want to leave either, because then he loses all his money. He knows where his bread is buttered. So what they try to do is go step... They were always railing against Europe on a national podium. And now they step up the European podium, which is, I think, it's scary, but it's also good for Europe in a way. Because finally, you get drama in European discussions. You get drama in European politics. Because European politics is nowadays about issues like the currency, like security, health. All these issues were always national, and now they have arrived in Europe. And it's good in a way that the drama then also moves from the national podium to the European one, because it makes politics politics. You need these emotions, and I hate them, but at the same time I realize that for people to have a feeling for, you know, this, it's a public space. The European political arena should be open for everyone. It makes it more understandable. It makes it, it will allow people to feel something, which is important. But of course, we have to then, if we don't want them to implement all their ideas, changing Europe, then the others have to really defend themselves and defend what we have. And this is sometimes, you know, people are now waking up, I think, which is good.
Yeah, maybe all these crises have also shown, I mean, I would hope, show people that it makes sense to have this bigger space to discuss, to help each other in different ways, because sometimes it was the Greeks who were in trouble, and then it was the Italians in the, especially now also in the COVID pandemic in the sort of southern countries, but not on the Greek side, but on the sort of Italy and France, who were heavily hit by the pandemic and so on and so forth. So it's always, it makes, so I wonder, how do you see the war influencing the European nations? Because now we have suddenly a move from the Poles, for example, who see how good it is if the whole of the European Union pulls together to help with financial aid in a moment when the neighboring country is in war.
I think there are a lot of things happening in that sense. If you look at the south of Europe, which was a bit, you know, the problem zone for a long time during the Euro crisis, they are doing very well in the energy crisis. Like Portugal is doing very well, Spain is doing very well, even Italy and Greece. So you see Central Europe is emancipating itself. They're finally, in a way, arriving in Brussels, which is very interesting to see, because they are close to the theater, to the battlefield. And they had, moreover, they've told us for many years, watch out for the Russians, and they're coming and they're coming, and they are coming. So we owe them that, and they tell us, we've told you so. And look at Poland, for instance. Poland was totally marginalized before the war because of this rule of law issue, and they were, you know, as the EU does with Hungary now, it tried to do it with Poland as well. Poland is a big country, and they were, you know, slowly drifting into a corner, and they couldn't get out of it anymore. Now they're getting out of it, and they're even trying, not enough, but trying to put this rule of law issue behind them even, by offering compromises which don't go far enough, but something is happening even.
But I mean, this
is interesting.
The fundamental issues don't go away, of course. You know, that you have the rule of law in Poland and Hungary, the governments, Orban was re-elected. You know, these things will stay even if...
But there's an interest suddenly in moving in Warsaw, which was not there before, because it was the only issue, basically. And now there's so many issues. The Nordic countries are very interesting too, because they were there, except Finland, they were in Europe a little bit like the British were, because of the market. And because, you know, they wanted to sit at the table, but not share too much. And now, you know, they're running towards the center of Europe. Denmark is joining defense initiatives. The Swedish and the Finns are have joined NATO, which also brings so they're running for cover. And I hear that in many other debates, the Nordics were always saying, no, we shouldn't spend money on this, and also very frugal. They want to throw money at every problem now. So it changes, and this is not just on issues. This is like the political ball game within the European Union is changing profoundly. It's very interesting.
But it is, in a sense, we can thank Putin for bringing Europe together.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, he was more successful when he was financing troll factories in Petersburg to influence European public opinion. Then we didn't know what, or many people didn't understand what he was doing. Now we can clearly see what he's doing, and that has
it's not just Putin. I think it is Trump as well, and it was also Brexit. All these things were, suddenly you feel the difference between, it's like psychology almost, between you and the rest. If you are surrounded by rulers who want to screw you, basically, and who want to hurt you,
different political
or cut a part of you, or to damage you, all of a sudden you realize who you are all together, and we never had much of that, of course.
And do you feel this in Brussels now, that the political atmosphere in the institutions with the member states, that it is more coming together than it was?
Yes, yeah. People are working like, till midnight every day, and entire weekends. They always worked hard in Brussels. I know nobody wants to believe that, but it's true. But now there's no stopping. Because, and then we come back to the Habsburgers again. Because it is in these kind of crises where member states or nations on their own are helpless. This is one of them, like with the pandemic. So then they look at Brussels, and they want Brussels to help them by doing things together. And so Brussels has to deliver. These are crucial moments for more Europe, but also crucial moments for added value. And if they don't manage to give the added value, people will turn away. And this was exactly the same in the Habsburg Empire. They had to deliver. Why did the Habsburg Empire? One of the questions that made me write this book was somebody asking me in 2016, can the EU end up like the Habsburg Empire? I mean, by imploding or exploding after the war. And I think in the end, what killed the Habsburg Empire was not nationalism, as we all learned at school, but it was the war. Because during the war, all the money went to the front. It was a disaster from day one. The front was huge as well. All the reforms were stopped, and they were always, as usual, too little, like in the EU, too little and too late. But there was a lot going on politically. There was a parliament, and people got more rights, and you had trade unions, and they were walking in the streets. I was surprised. I didn't know this either. All that was stopped during the war. The parliament was even closed, and there was a sort of a junta almost taking over and deciding all these things. We need all the noses in the right direction now. So slowly, there was no money left. There was no energy left. There was no. The state couldn't take care of its people anymore.
When people died.
So it was not nationalism that killed the Habsburg Empire. This is why people ask me that question, of course. Yeah. Can Le Pen and Orban, and can they kill the EU? That was the question they tried to ask. No, I don't think so. But what killed the Habsburg Empire was the conditions in which these nationalists thrived, like hunger, destruction, chaos. And this is, of course, the danger still. If the EU doesn't manage to give added value, the same thing will happen. And what Putin is doing is very dangerous now. He's waging an economic war on us. He's trying to set up groups in Europe against one another. He did this in Ukraine early on, but he does it with us as well. He's funding groups that hate each other in many European countries, and just, you know, has them believe stories about each other which are not true, and then, you know, pit everybody against everybody, basically.
But so yeah.
He's trying to make us poor. He's trying to make us cold. He's trying to make us sick. I don't know what. This can be dangerous. Yes.
But in the debate, how long Europe can sustain unity in the face of this war, we were saying, you know, in the summer people became very pessimistic because yes. everyone was afraid of the winter. Now we're in the winter, so at least so far, even if everything is very expensive, we can also see that the governments, especially the Austrian and the German ones that were so particularly dependent on Russian gas, have filled all the
reservoirs.
The reservoirs are full, and for the moment it's okay. So if we get through this winter, the question is, will we get through another year of the war? Yeah? So how long do you think that the European Union, in its leadership in Brussels, but also with the member states, can stay united to fend off until Putin breaks?
Well, if Putin keeps behaving like he does, I think he helps us a little bit with that, frankly. I mean, it's so terrible what he does. You can't put words to it, but and this is deeply felt, I think. So that I think we can keep going for a long time. And we also, this is another parallel, I mean, we always think that we don't manage, don't you think? We always believe that we will not manage to vaccinate all of Europe. We will never manage to put on the heating during the winter. People really believed that we would have nothing this winter. I mean, most probably we will, you know, because when there's a problem, there will be solutions. And some people are really working hard on those solutions. It reminds me a little bit of the Habsburg Empire, you know, and you see it in the Joseph Roth books, and you know, everybody's always pissing on the empire and always thinking like, we will never manage to do this. And when the Kaiser in the end declared war on Serbia, just thinking, you know, we give them a few hits for a few weeks and then we sue for peace, and then it was different, of course. But when he signed that, he said, "Oh, I'm sure we will lose this one as well." You know, this could have been some kind of a European commissioner in Brussels talking about the Eastern Partnership program or something. You know, people, or an FT commentator on some kind of a European program. You know. We have so little self-confidence, or confidence even.
Yeah, that's true, but there are also huge problems, especially if you look at Serbia today. So the entire West Balkan strategy of the European Union was sort of half-heartedly put out, and then there was a kind of almost an invitation to Russia or to China to invest and turn their heads in their direction. And so I wonder if, you know, you may be right that we are underestimating sometimes our strengths and our abilities in the European Union, also to work together in crisis. But do we have enough strength to develop, you know, to really face off fundamental problems for a longer time than just to get through crises always?
Good question, of course. You know, one of the things that always strikes me is we do things in jolts, like when Greece almost went bankrupt, remember? And then nobody wanted to have this rescue fund, and then, well, maybe it's probably a better idea if we do, and then they only wanted to do a little bit. And it was not enough. So they had to come back every time. And it looks very messy. And it looks very stupid as well. It's like, why don't you just do it at once? You know, you do it well, and it's over. And then we've solved that problem. That's what the British always said. That's why they didn't understand this Euro crisis at all. But there is even a whole academic discipline on the principle of failing forward. Have you heard this? Failing forward is that you come to the table, you compromise, and not enough to solve the problem for once and for all. So after a couple of weeks or months, the fire starts again. And it's a bigger fire even than the first time. So then everybody has to come back to the negotiating table and compromise more and do more. So each time you have a new layer of, you know, sort of a pseudo or temporary solution until it holds. But actually this is a rather strong tissue. Because, and I think this, you saw it during the, with Brexit. The UK had really expected, they wanted to have shortcuts. They didn't want all these rules anymore, but still they wanted to have part of the pie. So they wanted shortcuts, and they wanted to us, the others, the stayers, they wanted us to break open all kinds of European deals to get their shortcuts. And they were mistaken, because these deals are all made up from, you know, years of negotiations, extremely painful, a lot of failing forward. So, you know, then you're at it again, and the fire again flares up. So nobody wants to reopen these deals. So even if they are like shitty deals sometimes, they are much stronger than many people think. Do you know Robert Cooper? He was here many times, I think, Robert Cooper, the man who worked for, the British diplomat who worked for Javier Solana. He wrote a wonderful book. It's called The Ambassadors. And so he writes about this as well. And so he's been in the European Council a lot. And he says that, you know, today I kill you because of milk quota or something. You know, we really can't see eye to eye. And we fight each other tooth and nail. But we both know that tomorrow we need each other on some kind of a, you know, chemistry legislation. Because on that issue, we're on the same side. So everybody has to continue with everybody afterwards.
Well, that's definitely, yeah.
That makes it very strong, and also, but also flexible in a way.
Yeah, that's probably the big similarity with the way Kaiser Franz Joseph tried to get all the nations under control. The big difference, of course, is it's not only nationalism that killed the monarchy, but also that the monarchy and absolutism was, of course, an outdated political system. And democracy was supposed to come in and take over and let us all have a say, not only our not beloved monarch on the top of the state. And that's the question then, if the European Union just will prevail, because it's in its imperfection still a way how all the nations in a more or less democratic way can have their say together and create peace for each other.
It is the big question. It's always, and it will always be there, I think. Because it's never perfect, you're never there. Often you think you're there, and then something happens again in the world. Everything is upset. So you have to. Everybody always said health is a national issue. You know, we will never allow Brussels, the European Commission, to take that away from us. You know, just one virus has changed many things.
I mean, a few.
I mean, it's not like animal health.
Corona demonstrators would probably.
But it's not like animal health. It's. I mean, this is very interesting. Remember, I think we were in Brussels at the same time when all these health scares were there with mad cow disease.
Yeah.
Since then, when there's one sick animal somewhere in the member state in Europe, we have such a good system. Automatically, the whole.
It's being flagged to everyone.
It's being flagged, and everything is done more or less automatically. Everybody knows what to do. The whole system is ready, a European system.
Yeah.
So animal health is completely European, and nobody seems to care, because it works well. That's why nobody cares. Nobody even knows it, probably. But human health is a different story. Well, but now it's also
EU
changing.
matter. But so from health we went very quickly to the defense question in the European Union, which is now discussed if we should all have together chip in and try and find a more stronger defense on the European Union level, also in order not to be completely dependent on NATO organization. At which point we have to say to our listeners and viewers online, thank you very much for listening. But here in the hall, I think Caroline would be quite happy to take a few questions if you have.